right. It is 6:04. Today is March 27th, 2023. This is a City Council Subcommittee meeting of Community Relations Committee. Before we go any further, I would like to read the following statement, if I may. This meeting is being recorded by the Community Relations Committee. If any other persons present are doing the same, you must notify the chairperson at this time in accordance with MGL Chapter 30A, Section 20G. No person shall address a meeting of a public body without permission of the chair, and all persons shall, at the request of the chair, be silent. No person shall disrupt the proceedings of a meeting of a public body if after clear warning from the chair, a person continues to disrupt the proceedings, the chair may order the person to withdraw from the meeting, and if the person does not withdraw, the chair may authorize a constable or other officer to remove the person from the meeting. We will have roll call. Councilor Lapinski.
I'm in the room.
Councilor Mayo.
Here.
Councilor Ricketts. Councilor Toronzo. Councilor Forgy, I'm here, so we have a quorum. All right, so there are no minutes to be approved, and today the focus of this committee meeting is to talk about police reform, and we have David Lanoy with us today, who by reputation comes to us with a great deal of knowledge. I know you have all met him. His current position is on the Public Safety Committee. And I've asked him here this evening just for him to give us an overview and tell us what's important for us to know about police reform and social justice. And also, I am going to, after his presentation, I'm going to open this up so we can have a public discussion. I just want to go on record as saying that there's an expectation that the discussion will be held in a very civil manner. And I will try to recognize everybody who wants to talk. I'd like to give those people an opportunity at this time to speak, and then also a follow-up. But I'm going to ask people if they would share and take their turns, and then we'll go back to people who have other comments. Again, thanks everybody for being here this evening. I'll turn it over to David Lanoy. Thank you so much for being here with us this evening. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
I don't know if you'll say that after I get into the 40th page of the presentation.
Well, I don't know. As long as you didn't bring a PowerPoint, we're good.
I didn't bring a PowerPoint. Again, thank you for having me, and thank you for the invitation. And I would never say no to an invitation that asks me to make a presentation on something that I'm engaged with. Sure. Or that I may know a little bit about.
Point of order. David, so you're here by reputation, as we heard, but I'm one of the people that doesn't know you by reputation. Sure. So if you would just introduce yourself by way of credentials and experience.
I'd be happy to do that. And I just want to acknowledge the mayor, who is here by Zoom. Hello, Mayor. Hello. Thank you for coming. This could take a while. Yeah.
That's okay. I think it's
sure. So I've served in our municipal government on many levels, starting on the old council in 1998. And then I ran for and obtained a position on the Board of Selectmen in 2000. I then ran for the Charter Commission, and I was successful. You had to be in, I think it was one of the top 7. Correct. So I got on, I think I came in 6.5. So I was a member of the Charter Commission. Then I was a member of the Full Commission. I was in favor, by the way, of a mayoral form of government, believing that as we evolved as a city, we would have the opportunity and the need for executive leadership. I then served on the Redevelopment Authority.
The camera can't see you.
Then I served on GSET.
Excuse me, he's speaking.
Then I served on GSET.
Okay, thank you. I know you're saying that.
So that's my municipal credential. Academically, I'm a graduate of Holy Cross College with a degree in political science, concentrating in history and sociology. I went on to work for the sheriff's office while obtaining my law degree from Suffolk University Law School. I then joined the sheriff's office on a full-time basis, having started as a corrections officer. I was then police certified, became a deputy sheriff. I then worked my way up the ranks. And as of today, I've worked for 7 sheriffs in the Commonwealth and 4 counties with varying degrees of responsibility. I'm a certified jail manager by virtue of my participation and graduation from the American Jail Association National Leadership Program. I'm in my 33rd year of teaching at the college level, both undergraduate, graduate, and 2-year schools. I've been at Greenfield Community College since 2003. So this is my 33rd year or 66th consecutive semester teaching. I love teaching. I love being a public safety practitioner. I currently hold the title of Special Sheriff of Hampshire County, which is a statutory title. And as I was saying before the meeting, I had retired from the Franklin Sheriff's Office as superintendent under Chris Donlin and took some time off just teaching. And then I was asked by Sheriff Patrick Cahalan if I would come down and assist him with, actually the first iteration of reform was 2018 Criminal Justice Reform Bill, which is known as Chapter 69 of the General Laws. And then we had Chapter 253 of the Acts of 2020, which is police reform. I am wedded to the concept that social control and a system of social control in a racially diverse democracy is the touchstone for all productive activity that happens in our culture. And that in a democracy, it's very difficult to achieve that type of system and agree upon it. I believe in social justice. I believe in an empathic criminology. I'm unabashed about that. I'm not bashful about talking about it. I have confidence in policing generally and in police reform as we move forward and understand scholarly research, which gives us evidence-based data and data points for which to deal with the problems that we have in this society. So I was going to say some of that anyway, so thank you. And it's nice to see you, Commissioner. I mean, you know, you're not a commissioner, right? You were going to be a commissioner, but you're still a counselor.
I could be it all.
You could be it all. Penny Ricketts. Thank you for being here. So I'm going to just share a couple of points also about where I am on all these concepts, because it's very important, I think, for people to understand, not specifically my point of view, but again, sort of the provenance of where I'm coming from. So when I finally had a little breathing room around 2016 after having retired, I joined the Law Enforcement Action Partnership. And that's a national organization of current and former members of executive, prosecutorial, law enforcement, corrections, and other allied criminal justice professions who believe that we can do better. And I learned about them way back in 2003 when Detective Peter Christ of the Tonawanda, New York Police Department came here and spoke at Bella Notte about the fact that after 24 years as a narcotics detective, he had come to the conclusion that our punitive approach to criminal justice and our drug war was unwinnable and wrong. And so he was quite a catalyst in really supporting thinking that I already had about the fact that we can have accountability and a less punitive approach to how we deal with people who go astray and commit bad acts in our culture. And so I don't have enough of these to give out, but speaking engagements, which I do for LEAP, we have these little cards. And if we meet someone from the criminal justice system, we give them this card. And so here's what it says. Are you a criminal justice professional who sometimes feels you put yourself in danger to enforce laws that don't make our neighborhood safer? Wants to give people the means to rehabilitate themselves instead of watching them cycle through the system again and again? Has watched colleagues self-medicate in an attempt to manage stress and trauma because seeking help would hurt their careers? Thinks that people should speak out in favor of solutions they believe in? If you answered yes to any of these questions, the Law Enforcement Action Partnership would like to speak to you. Then I just go on to describe it. We are the Law Enforcement Action Partnership, a 501c3 nonprofit organization of police, corrections officers, judges, prosecutors, federal agents, and other criminal justice professionals who seek to make our community safer and restore respect for police by advocating for responsible and effective public safety solutions. This is a wonderful organization. And had I not taken some time off and had I not had a call from, I don't know if anybody remembers, Mrs. Knowlton, the chief of public safety at Greenfield Community College, long time ago, who invited me to that, I would never have gotten involved. So tonight I'm going to talk about the criminal justice reform bill in Massachusetts. And I promise you that although it looks like 1,000 pieces of paper here, I won't take a lot of time, but I want to get through it because just by contrast, the criminal justice reform bill, this is printed on 2 sides, is about 136 pages in length. It is a monumental piece of legislation, and I congratulate the general court for passing it and the governor for signing it. That doesn't mean I agree with everything in it. I'm going to be honest about the points that I agree with and the things that I have some disagreement with. And so this is sort of a 2-part presentation. I never teach with any kind of a prepared script, but if I give a presentation, I use a prepared script so that I don't leave anything out. The first part of the presentation is going to be, in essence, informational things that, as Vice President 4G, that's your title now, right?
Yeah, it is.
Vice President 4G indicated are important for us to know, because as a public safety commissioner, obviously, I'm concerned about my own community and the larger community, and I'm also concerned about the costs of legislation. And I know that the council deliberates that every single month and has done that since I served on the council. The budget is something that is finite. We only have so much money to spend. Sometimes unfunded mandates come our way. More often than not, we have to figure out how to pay for them. I also would like to pass out, if I could, just something that is sort of a touchstone for my belief system about policing, and it dates back to 1829. And it's listed on the Law Enforcement Action Partnership website. And I passed it out at the Public Safety Commissioners meeting because I think it's so important. It's Sir Robert Peel's Policing Principles. 9 principles of policing. I think they're as good now as they were in 1829, accompanied also by the core ideas. Robert Peel was an interesting character. He was attempting to get the Metropolitan Police Force in London sponsored and built. And he had to convince a very skeptical Parliament about this idea of putting citizens in uniform and giving them power over other citizens. And so he was able to convince them to do that. And that gave birth to the Metropolitan Police Act, which became the forerunner for really modern policing all the way back in the early 19th century. So I give you that as a template for some of the thought processes that I've had, and then I'll get right into this, and I promise you I'll be as quick as possible. This is an overview with some commentary, and I'll begin. So this is Chapter 253 of the Acts of 2020. It's an act relative to justice, equity, and accountability in law enforcement in the Commonwealth. It's a brief summary. I know, I was thinking the bill itself is probably 7 term papers. This is just a short scholar's essay. Okay, so, we're not going to have to order out. So I just want to say up front that any observations, recommendations, or critiques or conclusions, apart from the descriptions of the bill itself, are my opinion. They are based on my experience as a public safety practitioner, as an academician in the field of criminal justice, and as an attorney. My critiques, if any, are intended as constructive and collaborative. And so here we go. So the final bill institutes changes in our Massachusetts criminal justice system in the area of policing in the following ways. It modifies the existing framework for training across the Commonwealth. It creates a standardized certification and decertification process for officials who are designated in the bill as law enforcement officers. It removes and/or alters the role of the Civil Service Commission and collective bargaining agreements, with regard to the decertification law of that affects law enforcement officials. It creates a legislative commission to investigate and study the impact to administration of justice of the qualified immunity doctrine and the origins that are presented by interpretations by our courts in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. It enumerates specific topics to be addressed in recruit and in-service training of police officers, some of which are based upon newer models of evidence-based trauma and informed practices and diversion. It addresses institutional racism in criminal justice through training language, decertification guidelines, and the establishment of permanent commissions. The bill does not address the following. It does not create an entry-level requirement for a college degree for law enforcement or credit for training or incentives beyond stipends for completion of new or specialized training, all of which are, in my view, fundamental to changing both the thought process and the approach in both policing and corrections. Corrections, by the way, is next. I believe an acronym is going to be called COST, Correction Officer Certification and Training. It does not address the basis of qualified immunity, except to add a presumption that decertification removes qualified immunity with regard to the conduct which triggered the decertification. And then, of course, as I said, there is a requirement that we have to study the doctrine. I could be here for 3 hours explaining the nuance of qualified immunity. I don't think you want me to do that, but I'm sure there'll be other venues where the commission talks about it and we talk about it. So qualified immunity, I'm sure you've seen that in the news. It's a concern of the reform community, and explaining it is probably the hardest part. The bill embraces what we call a POST system, Peace Officer Standards and Training, which Massachusetts did not have. Massachusetts was one of the few states in the country without a POST system. It does preserve, however, the Municipal Police Training Committee, which is the municipal police model for training, and it doesn't definitively address law enforcement on a multi-agency level for training, education, and certification. Why this is a little bit muddy and problematic is that not all policing is municipal policing. And in this bill, in addition to municipal police, the definition of law enforcement now encompasses municipal police, environmental police, state police, sheriffs, MBTA, Port Authority, campus police of both public and private institutions, harbor masters, certain public health hospital facility police, and constables, and then at a future date, state and county corrections officers. This is a comprehensive piece of legislation, and that's why it's important for me to say at the outset, as I did, any critiques are constructive. This is putting something like this together as quickly as it was put together is just a monumental task for any public body. The bill provides a provision recognizing certification of existing officers as of July of 2021, and then, of course, allowed for a 3-year period of bridge academies. Bridge academies, you can think about them as a crosswalk from certification to recertification, which then has a sunset provision. So it was done in 3 segments of the alphabet. We're on the last segment now. So as of July 1st of next year, people who were certified prior to the bill, who didn't bridge, won't be certified under the guidelines set by POST. Summary of the highlights of the bill. There was some debate at the beginning of the bill about not having the municipal police training framework. The legislature took it out. The governor put it back in. And so what we have is the MPTC is the training arm, but we now have, for the first time, the Peace Officer Standards and Training Commission. Now that commission was the subject of debate as well. The legislature in the first version of the bill kept it outside of state government with authority. The governor, Baker at the time, of course, was leery of that and wanted it within the auspices of EOPS, although still independent in its powers and decision-making. And so the final bill that he signed does 2 things. It put the MPTC back in charge of the training, or the centerpiece of the training framework, and it put POST within EOPS. EOPS is Executive Office of Public Safety. Training and certification standards, then, the bill calls for them to be jointly developed by Post and the MPTC. Within Post, there are two significant divisions. One is called Division of Standards. The other is called Division of Certification. Law enforcement agencies within the Post, now, as I said before, include all of those agencies that I just talked about, with corrections officers to be included with a more specific certification to their duties at a later date. Post has statutory, civil enforcement authority in matters of certification, recertification, suspension, and decertification of law enforcement officials. They have adjudicatory authority, they have subpoena power, and they have sweeping authority also to interpret legislative intent within this 136-page document. And I have to say, even as an attorney, I've read it several times. There are many areas that are vague or confusing and will need to be flushed out going forward. And that's the nature of legislation. I'm not picking on this particular bill. The state police, there is an entire section addressing training and recruitment, a cadet program, and what is new, or maybe you want to know, what is really new there is the legislature for the first time is granting the governor the option of appointing the colonel of the state police in this bill from outside the agency. Wow. That's a first. So the governor has, I understand, appointed an interim colonel. So I don't know what's going to happen after that. But this particular legislation allows for that. State police will continue to conduct their own training, which doesn't make this a true post. It makes it sort of a hybrid. But in practice, they will still statutorily be within the post MPTC oversight language. So certification and decertification highlights. The Post Commission has unilateral, non-appealable authority regarding certification, and more importantly, the permanent decertification of a law enforcement official through its investigatory body, which is the Division of Police Standards, which, as I said, has all the powers of a law enforcement agency, typically civil enforcement, with the power to refer cases to the Attorney General for criminal prosecution. Current law enforcement officials with a certification, state police, or the prior training council, again, were automatically certified, as I was, upon passage of the bill, and then are subject to recertification rules, which I refer to as the bridge, with an option to choose whether to participate in bridge, to gain recertification or not to. Many people retired, many people chose not to, depending on where they were in their careers, so on and so forth. Now, the language creates broad authority. As I said, there are 32 or more specifically enumerated violations, which could lead to either a suspension, a modification, or a full decertification, with a legal standard of proof for full decertification being clear and convincing evidence, or in the other categories by a preponderance of the evidence with certain due process protections built into that system. A decision on the language of the bill, a decision to decertify cannot be appealed to civil service, nor is it protected by a collective bargaining agreement. There are due process protections within post, both in the investigatory and the adjudicatory framework. Obviously, I talk to colleagues, I talk to other attorneys, I talk to folks that are involved with labor. There is a lot of confusion about how exactly that's going to work. And we live in a pretty litigious society, so I think it's going to spawn litigation going forward. And I can't make predictions about how that's going to come out. Any agency, executive public safety officer, or other entity named in the bill is prohibited from hiring a decertified officer in any capacity, including as a consultant or contractor. So I hope this is the kind of information that.
I think this is very helpful.
Okay. Then, of course, calls for an independent commission for certification or decertification of county corrections officers. Enumerated or listed, I mean listed when I say enumerated, I'm sorry, there's some legal jargon here. Enumerated training areas and topics in the statute that will be required, and the oversight will be provided for them through the MPTC are domestic and sexual violence, bias-free policing, use of technology to improve policing, de-escalation and disengagement, alternatives to use of force, understanding substance abuse disorders and trauma, strategies for reducing risk of harm, cultural competency, understanding autism and spectrum developmental disabilities as to victims, witnesses, and perpetrators, procedural justice, racial profiling, use of force with chokeholds, as you all know, being specifically banned. I would note that in Massachusetts, chokehold was not trained upon or used prior to the bill, but it's officially banned now. Specialized training preferred for school resource officers, children, adolescents, cognitive development, de-escalation, and bicycle safety and enforcement made it into the bill. The next thing the bill creates are permanent commissions, creates a lot of commissions. The permanent commissions are the status of African-American persons, on the status of Latino, Latinx persons, the status of persons with disabilities, and the status, social status of Black men and boys. Legislative and special legislative commissions are as follows. Training comprehensive protocols for the training of corrections officers and juvenile detention officials, creation of an independent body with the power to deal with certification issues relative to corrections officers, law enforcement body camera task force within the Executive Office of Public Safety, a special legislative commission to study facial recognition technology. And I'm going to stop here and give you an anecdote that I think everybody would be interested in. It was in the news, you might have seen it. Recently, a woman who's an attorney from New Jersey took her family to Radio City Music Hall. This happened during the holidays. And she was turned away by a security official. And she was turned away because they use, through their private security, facial recognition. And she was recognized as a member of a law firm that was on the opponent's side of litigation that was in progress between the corporate owners of the Radio City Music Hall and her firm. There was no other basis for her to be turned away, with the exception that she was associated with a firm and her firm was litigating against the owners of the Radio City Music Hall. So I think that makes facial technology a little scary when you think about what government can do with it and what the private sector can do with it. Also creates a special legislative commission to study emergency hospitalizations by law enforcement, special commission to examine civil service, hiring procedures for non-civil service municipalities and the state police, special legislative commission to study establishment of a statewide law enforcement cadet program, special legislative commission to study the doctrine of qualified immunity, special legislative commission on structural racism in correctional facilities, special legislative commission on structural racism in the parole process, special legislative commission on structural racism in the probation process. Finally, other community policing and behavioral health council is directed to study and make recommendations for creating crisis response and continuity of care systems, which essentially are evidence-based, trauma-informed policing corrections, including crisis response and diversion. And the bill directs to the appropriate committee to promulgate regulations requiring law enforcement agencies to participate in critical incident stress management, peer support programs to address police officer mental illness, suicide prevention, and their effects on public safety. A lot. May I keep moving? Okay. I don't want to go too slow or too fast. So the early stages of the legislation I've already talked about. So we get to comments and analysis. The bill is generally divided into two parts. Part one creates the 15 bodies most charged with the implementation of studies. 8 of those bodies are special legislative commissions and 4 are permanent. I described what they're for. 3 of the legislative commissions and all 4 permanent commissions are charged with either studying structural racism within the state's criminal justice system or with the status of African Americans, Latino, Latinx, and persons with disabilities. Some commentary that I have observed based upon research we already have comes next. While there is no doubt that these areas are appropriate to study, we already have copious and accurate data from which to make reforms. The following data points provides the basis for long overdue changes in criminal justice policy to address inequitable and punitive responses and approaches to people who are part of or affected by the statutory commissions that have been mentioned. The system, when I say the word system, I'm not talking a micros thing. I'm saying, at the national level, the state level, in localities, our criminal justice system has and continues to have, and supported by evidence, a disproportionate adverse impact in minority and poor communities. So these are the data points that I would point out here. Structural racism has long been identified and occurs nationally and locally in the administration of criminal justice, including in the police, court, and correctional systems. Black and brown citizens, particularly, and poor citizens of all races, suffer from a disproportionate and often punitive and/or discriminatory response, not only within criminal justice, but also with regard to housing, education, healthcare, nutrition, access to jobs, post-release availability of homes, and many other issues that we refer to in our system as collateral consequences of interacting with our justice system. There is a growing and credible body of research indicating that we have misused or overused detention in the United States across the board, that our bail and sentencing systems are in need of sweeping overhauls, that prosecutorial discretion, which is called the principle of regularity, as well as the grand jury process, are potential sources of either discrimination or a bar to selective prosecution claims, particularly for Black and brown defendants. Anecdotally, in 1996, the United States Supreme Court shut the door on selective prosecution claims for Black and brown defendants unanimously in the case of United States versus Armstrong. And you can look at Michelle Alexander's very credible and well-written book, The New Jim Crow, for evidence of the reality of that circumstance. Entry-level requirements for police and corrections officers across the nation are among the lowest of all professions and may be inadequate to the challenges of administering fair, evidence-based public safety systems going forward. The body of federal criminal law continues to grow at breakneck speed, creating redundant punitive responses to criminal behavior. The framers of the Constitution never intended creation of a full-blown federal criminal justice system, but we have one. State legislators in the United States Congress have consistently passed laws which call for long and longer prison terms, mandatory minimums, all of which create collateral consequences beyond criminal records, such as closed access to voting, jobs, housing, public assistance, and other opportunities that are readily available to citizens who are not justice involved. It has been proven time again that the principle of criminology upon which our system is based, which we call the classical criminology, based on deterrence, is flawed. It is flawed because it assumes that each and every person is both rational, thinks the same as every other person, and has free choice. Increasingly punitive responses using a system of deterrence have led to overcrowded prisons. They've led to the drug war, and they've led to significant problems that exist within our system, which quite frankly, we ask the police to then deal with, which is not fair. Trauma-informed evidence-based approaches to policing, corrections, and judicial administration exist and have been proven to achieve public safety and improve lives with fewer punitive sanctions or collateral consequences. Police states have militarized police forces. Police states are not democracies. The United States of America is a democracy. The militarization of police, so-called, is evidence of a decrease in the level of confidence citizens have in governmental authority generally, and a perception of inequitable use of police authority, whether it's happening or not at the street level. There is a mounting body of evidence that indicates that the paramilitary model of law enforcement training is overemphasized, reinforcing a punitive instead of a collaborative or empathic form of social control. Police and public safety agencies, and I can attest to this from my own career, are continuously burdened with new enforcement priorities, but without meaningful diversionary alternatives or infrastructures available to police and corrections systems. Public education in the most underserved communities obviously lacks resources. Families lack educational choice, particularly in poor urban and rural communities. And finally, the last data point, and these are all evidence-based and we can support them. The United States, although among the wealthiest of nations, does not provide adequate housing for low-income citizens, with less than 5% of our housing stock being publicly owned, as opposed to nearly 40% in European nations, industrial democracies. The poverty rate in major cities where a majority of the nation's minority citizens live is double, or in some cases triple, the state average. So I go on to talk about the fact that the study framework is not wrong. I like them. We're going to study. But studies have been historically used to put off making major changes in public policy in the near term. So I say that the legislature did not use this opportunity to make more aggressive system change is probably something they didn't have time to do, and I understand that. But the findings of commissions have often been ignored over the long term. One local example of this comes from the prison field. This is a quote from a famous case in Boston called the Inmates of Suffolk County Jail versus Eisenstadt. Judge Garrity, who anybody here is over 60.
Why do you look at me?
I'm looking at me too. Anybody that's here over 60 would remember Judge Arthur Garrity, who had the terrible, terrible job of presiding over the busing, the forced busing of the integration busing in the city of Boston. But he also presided over the first major jail reform case in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts at the federal court level. And this is what he said, quote, "During the past quarter century, 7 separate governmental commissions studied the Charles Street Jail and condemned it. Most of them recommended that it be abandoned and a new facility constructed. The governmental agencies either sponsoring or conducting the studies of Charles Street were the City of Boston, 1949, the Governor's Committee, 1962, the Municipal Research Bureau, 1962, the Finance Commission, 1963, the Redevelopment Authority, 1946, the National Council on Crime and Delinquency, 1968, and a Special Legislative Commission in 1970. But when the Eisenstadt opinion was issued in 1973, another condemnation of the Charles Street Jail, this time on constitutional grounds, the jail remained open. In fact, it wasn't replaced until 1991. Having been in continuous operation, quote, brutalizing its human baggage since 1848. Even with a court order issued in 1973 and a continuing jurisdiction maintained by the court, the replacement took another 18 years. My hope is that the 4 permanent commissions called for in this bill will be an antidote for this problem and can be repositories for data for future legislative deliberations. Because substantive change has to happen. We need alternatives. We need diversionary options. And we need to keep people safe. And that infrastructure does not exist, in my view. Part 2 of the bill enumerates conduct which triggers the decertification of a public safety official. It arguably forecloses any claim of qualified immunity, as I said prior. And I agree wholeheartedly that the bill identifies these broad areas of improper conduct, but it doesn't define each and every one in specific legal terms, which will lead to decertification. Cautionary note there is that may have a chilling effect on our ability to recruit people into the system to do the job of policing or to do the job of jail operations. And that should be of concern to all of us. Going forward, we should be able to attract people to this important position. And I know that that's a problem. I've experienced it. So again, I'm going to do some commentary here that involves reading. Since the abolition of constitutional criminal procedure during the Warren Court, the courts have tried to reconcile the interplay of legal principles and factual circumstances similar to what's happening in this police reform bill, and they develop bright line rules to provide guidance during otherwise chaotic events encountered in law enforcement and corrections. Anyone who's done police work or corrections work here knows what a bright line rule is, right? There's a bright line, you can do it or you can't do it. Well, I believe there's a value to bright line rules. However, with the training experience for a police officer should not be truncated in ways that make the complexity of social control overly simplistic. The changes to training called for in the legislation, which in most cases should be the subject of college courses, may be insufficient to meet the standards set by the bill. The bill does not lay out a framework for enhancing the entry-level requirements for police and corrections beyond high school and the training academy. With all due respect to training academies, given the weight that the legislature has given to the topic of police reform, this surprises me. If higher expectations and standards for policing and jail administration are to be optimized, it seems logical that officers should be given the skill set, both tactile and intellectual, to meet the objectives set forth in the bill. One way to provide the skill set is to require a minimum of a 2-year college degree in any major for public safety officials. This would recognize that training and education are complementary, not mutually exclusive. Ironically, there was a bill calling for this very degree filed and working its way through the legislature at the same time as the reform bill was being drafted. But as currently written, the bill makes no advance toward this goal. It can feel as though the legislation seems to be more retributive than reformative in its concentration on punitive responses to police conduct, and I don't say that lightly. Proscribing and punishing conduct by police or corrections officials which violates the law or is out of step with equitable public safety policy is necessary. We have to do it. Plainly and simply, law enforcement officers must be held to a higher standard, and they must live that standard on and off duty, understanding that the badge of office is more a burden than an entitlement. That said, legitimacy is a two-way street. It's always counterproductive to paint with a broad brush. Asking police to respect citizens, which we have a right to ask, requires us to respect them for the job they perform and the risks that they take. This further underscores, in my view, the value of education in broadening the worldview of those entrusted with maintaining social equilibrium in the streets and the neighborhoods of America and in our own community. It was a missed opportunity to change public safety on the front end here by changing entry-level qualifications. I want to read you something. It's hard to find old documents. This is the report of the governor's panel to review police training programs from 1989.
Wow.
And in that report, it says the following. The academic component of police training should give police officers a more solid foundation in the fundamental principles of democratic government and the communities in which they serve. They should have sufficient background in the growth of democratic institutions to enable them to understand and appreciate the complexity of the law enforcement task and the challenge inherent in its fulfillment. There is a need for established programs, well-documented curricula, materials, and qualified instructors. One of the Commonwealth's greatest resources, and one which could significantly contribute to the training of police officers, is its colleges and universities. These institutions of higher learning can potentially offer training sites and assistance in curriculum development, and failure to develop a strong association between police training and our college and universities would be a mistake. Unfortunately, the police reform bill does not embrace in its post a relationship with colleges, formalized in many cases across the country. In Massachusetts, we've touted the value of our community colleges, places where higher learning and workforce development come together to enhance communities. Colleges offering public safety courses and programs incorporate what they know to be important topics for enriching critical thinking and understanding about what an equal, socially just, and utilitarian criminal justice system should look like in a racially diverse country and in a democratic society. Indeed, the framework a society uses for social control is arguably the touchstone for all other productive activity. Moving forward in a time of political and social polarization, it is crucial to me, and I think to us, that public policy be made in a deliberative and dispassionate manner. This cannot occur in an echo chamber that forecloses robust debate, careful consideration, room for other viewpoints, and thoughtfulness. We should not create an atmosphere where logic is the enemy and truth is a menace. There must be common ground. Bottom line, there must be willingness on both sides of any issue to disrupt the status quo. And I think that the bill comes close to embracing that but follows a bit short here. How so? It seems to protect the status quo of training as opposed to an education training hybrid approach. It does not embrace a completely true post system. Certification standards appear as a cookie cutter, one standard for everybody. It lacks focus on a baseline educational standard or collaborative approach to broaden awareness and create critical thinking skills of officers at the entry level. In my roles, I've always wanted an officer to do what they have to do from a tactile standpoint, but the muscle that is inside here, the brain, also has to be exercised. Also, the emotive component of our brain, which makes us have other-centered value orientations when we're dealing with our fellow citizens. By creating one standard for certification, the bill achieves a long-hold goal of really the eastern part of the state that do not rely on part-time policing in their departments. This disproportionately impacts Western Massachusetts, our community, communities around us, as well as Cape Cod, the islands, and any rural areas in the Commonwealth that are pockets of the more metropolitan and populous counties, as well as agencies exercising law enforcement authority, but who do not perform general law enforcement primary response calls for service. Without, in my view, the requirement of a college degree for entry-level officers, there is little incentive to earn one. The funding for the Quinn bill was yanked back by the state. In 2008, it was retained by the state police. I ran a program. I was involved in a program that officers came to school for finishing a bachelor's degree and a master's degree. There was a financial benefit there. I don't understand what the fear of higher education is with respect to this very important profession that has so much authority over citizens or the incarcerated. Clearly, limiting officer participation and credentialing on the front end doesn't move the needle very far. And finally, conclusions, and I know you're going to say, thank God. This legislation is well-intended. It really is. It really is. It's well-intended in attempting to address and root out bad police officers, improve policing, improve jail administration. No legislation is perfect. As Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes once said, and by the way, he was a native of our state, hard cases often make bad law. No law is perfect. All of this is complicated. It can't be solved with defunding. It can't be solved with grandstanding on either side of an issue. We mustn't regard police as the enemy. I know I don't. We must accept the principle that all productive pursuits in our culture cannot occur without a basic, agreed upon system of social control. The creation and sustainability of that system as a culturally and racially diverse democracy is at best challenging. It requires support from the citizens. It requires mutual respect for diverse viewpoints. It requires an understanding of the necessity and danger of both power and authority. It requires fairness. It requires empathy. It is everything but simple. We seem to want to simplify it all, simplify everything. Let's assume that nothing's simple. That might inform our conversations in ways that are productive. Without communication, conciliation, and compromise, which are the 3 C's that my kids are tired of hearing about. 3 C's. Communication, conciliation, and compromise. There will be no society to preserve or community worth preserving. I leave you with 2 quotes. The first is on the role of the police, quoted by the late Professor Edwin Delattre. I personally knew him. He died about 3 years ago. He was a professor and the author of Character and Cops, Ethics and Policing, which I used in prior iterations in my ethics courses. Quote, "The romance of police activity keeps in some sense before the mind the fact that civilization itself is the most sensational of departures and the most romantic of rebellions. By dealing with the unsleeping sentinels, police, who guard the outposts of society, it tends to remind us that we live in an armed camp, making war with a chaotic world, and that criminals, the children of chaos, are nothing but the traitors within our gates. The romance of the police force is thus the romance of all humanity. It is based upon the fact that morality is the most daring and dark of conspiracies. It reminds us that the whole noiseless and unnoticeable police management by which we are ruled and protected is only, when it succeeds, a successful knight errantry. 2011. And on justice. Very simply, law and order exists for the purpose of establishing justice, and that when they fail in this purpose, they become the dangerously structured dams that block the flow of social progress, said Martin Luther King. So I have an appendix of topics that may add to a conversation later on. That's all I have for you tonight.
Fabulous.
Thank you very much.
so much. I would definitely take your course.
Come on down. We need enrollment.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you once again. That was very interesting. Now I'm going to open it up for discussion and questions. So, counselors, I'll turn to you first, giving counselors the opportunity to ask whatever is on their mind. And then I'll open it up to
I have
them.
a question.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Counselor Mayo.
That was a wonderful presentation. I certainly learned a lot, but one word I did not hear was sociology. I've always believed that it was important that police officers have a class of sociology in their background, because it presents a lot of features that you touched upon but didn't delve into, that I think police officers need to know, and it would help them be a better police officer if they took this course, because it has bias, it has racism, it talks a lot about inequality. Those are important things that police officers need to understand when they're policing. And sociology, I took a course just a couple of years ago in sociology, and it touched upon all of these things. And I don't see it in policing. It may be taught somewhere, but it just does not see it. I don't see it on the ground, so to speak. Can you talk about that?
Sure, and that's a great insight. So in the degree program at GCC, anyone majoring in criminal justice is required to take a basic sociology course and then to take a criminology course. I'm currently teaching one, and also to have the opportunity of the elective course in social issues and criminal justice. You're absolutely right, Counselor. Criminal justice is nothing more than an expression of sociology. So in criminology, we teach that the boilerplate approach to rational thinking is misinformed in a industrial, multi-layered, culturally diverse nation. So we're teaching about disorganization, which leads to certain behaviors. The state of anomie, which is a social definition of a feeling of disconnectedness from the social construct. You're right. This is why I'm amazed, and amazed that we have omitted this entry-level requirement, and that we somehow think that we can accomplish all of it with training, because we can't. Criminal justice is a constituency or a subset of sociology. In fact, I have talked in my end-of-year reports for several years in a row at Greenfield Community College, which is a wonderful college, by the way, if I may say so, about how closely allied criminal justice curriculum needs to be with the sociology curriculum in order to empower our students who go on to police work and corrections work to understand the nuances of how social disorganization affects thinking. So thank you for that.
Thank you. That was a wonderful response.
Thank you. Counselors? Or?
Yeah, so I have a question. So when we speak about policing, we wear many hats. So when I first think about it, I might wear the hat of an African-American mother. And so of your commentary, I'm just wondering, does it come mostly from you being a teacher, a lawyer, or because you worked in the jail system? Do you think there's any weight one way or the other to how you feel?
So that's a terrific question, and it's asked of me often. Because I got involved in this all serendipitously. I needed a job in the summer of 1984, and I got one at the Worcester County Jail. So let me start by saying my liberal arts education is the beginning point. I have a Bachelor of Arts from Holy Cross College. The Bachelor of Arts trained me for nothing and prepared me for everything. Learning how to think, having a worldview. Law school was a little more narrow. Didn't like it very much, but there were opportunities for elective courses about public policy and how it's made, and about how the judicial system works and thinks. I'm not a firm believer in the equity of the American legal system or whether it dispenses justice. I think we have a lot of words that describe it. I don't think they're necessarily accurate. As a jail officer, I worked in a large metropolitan jail on the front lines in the cell blocks for 6 or 7 years, even while earning my law degree. I was coming into contact with the people who the police had been in contact with just before. I then began to understand in my teaching that I had to do more to understand the African-American experience, which I tried to understand at Holy Cross College by taking courses that talked about people who were subjugated in their own nations. A year-long course on Nazism and how we got there. A year-long course on the Civil War and Reconstruction. Absolutely moaning and groaning because I didn't read my book, The Impending Crisis, which is the run-up to the Civil War, until the weekend before the final. And I had to lock myself in my room and read 500 pages on the social, political, and historical issues. I converse with my students in American politics about the importance of both 1619 and 1620 and the good and the bad and the ugly. I talk about immigrants with a caveat that the African-American fellow citizen, brother and sister in my community was not an immigrant by choice. And if this country cannot reconcile itself to that reality, we will never move forward. And I had the great pleasure for 2 years in a row of giving a workshop at the New England Conference of Criminal Justice, New England Conference of People of Color in Criminal Justice at Framingham State University. All the people who are there are criminal justice practitioners who are Black or brown. And the workshop I give is one that talks about institutional racism and then I ask them to share how it feels to be Black or brown in a broken system. And I ask them to talk about whether or not they feel co-opted by it or whether they can be heard and collaborated with within it. And there was not a more moving time the first day I went to my overbooked, overcrowded room, and I was in the minority. So I was a little shaken by that, and I said, I could fake something right now, but I just want to tell you, I feel a little scared today, and I promise not to tell you that I know about the Black experience. And that turned out to be a really good way to begin my lecture. And so I guess my law education, my Holy Cross experience, and my experience seeing people recidivate back to jail and get more and more sentences and not enough proactive, evidence-based, and targeted interventions. We don't mean what we say. We don't mean what we say. If we want people to return to the community, then we have to let them. If we want people to behave in ways that we expect them to behave, then we have to give them the tools and the opportunities that we enjoy. We can't live a society of double standards in our system. That's a long-winded answer. I apologize, but it's an important one. And one more statistic in that talk. If we take an average of 14% of the American population that is African American, and we go to a state like Maryland, where close to 75% of their state prison population is African American, we have to ask ourselves a question. Is that because African Americans are bad? Or is it because we somehow have found a way institutionally, intentionally or not, to jail more people who are African American in our correctional system in the United States? Well, Michelle Alexander wrote a book, The New Jim Crow, Discrimination in the World of Colorblindness. And she was shocked to look at what the statistics are. That most able-bodied young African American men in the city of Chicago have a felony record. And if you have a felony record, you don't get, to use Paul Simon's words in his great 2016 book, song, Wristband, you don't get the wristband. And if you don't have the wristband, guess what? You can't get through the door.
Right.
And so there's a balance to be had here. I say in this talk tonight that I disdain broad brush. I don't think any group should be put in a bucket, and that includes the police. On February the 1st, 1994, I was sitting in my office at Anna Maria College, and an emergency call went out, and I learned that one of my adult criminal justice students, who had proudly earned his bachelor's degree, had been shot to death in the woods in the neighboring town of Holden. Chief of Police Robert Mortel gave his life at age 36. Protecting public safety. And I was allowed at the college at that time to form and dedicate a public safety institute in his name. And I only mention that because when I see the things that have happened on the other side with Rodney King, with the situation in Memphis, with all the situations that we hear about, I am disgusted that folks think that a badge is an entitlement. It isn't. But I think there are great people in the system of law enforcement. I think there are dedicated individuals who want to serve the public. And I say that honestly because I know them. We have to come together as a culture and a society, agree to disagree, and stop pointing fingers at one another and solve our problems. If we solve the problems at the local level, imagine what we can do at the regional level, and then at the state level, and then at the national level. The opportunity is ours.
So I would ask the question, how do we begin to solve the problem at the local level? How does the Massachusetts Police Reform Act and post, things like that, are they sufficient enough to provide the tools that a municipality needs in order to get community policing and social justice pieces put in place? Do you have any brainstorming ideas on that?
So
I don't want to put you on the spot.
No, you're
so
not.
If you're,
No,
if
you're
you're
not.
uncomfortable, it's perfectly okay.
I do not believe that we can legislate culture change. I think culture change comes from our heart, and we have to want it. I think police reform is an attempt by a legislature to use the tools in its toolkit to reinforce rules with respect to policing, and I think that's okay. But I think we have to do it in our heart, because obviously when the Civil War ended, we didn't solve discrimination. We didn't solve segregation. And then, as Michelle Alexander aptly describes it, all it did was go underground and popped out its ugly head in different places and iterations. So it is up to us as adults and as role models to refuse to be hyper polarized, to refuse the carrot of you're on this side or you're on that side, but there's nothing in the middle.
But didn't posts kind of cause some of this because they didn't come out knowing exactly what they wanted at the end? Like it just kind of came out wrong. They knew what they wanted to do, but
So I'll say this. So I say this to my students. The law is imperfect. The law does not and cannot be expected to act with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. As a member of the bar, I advise people to seek mediation and conversation. We expect the law to solve our problems. And also in society, there's a great new book out, which I'm going to have my students read. It's called The Bill of Obligations. And the author talks about the fact that it's not enough that we have a Bill of Rights that give us rights in this country. The Bill of Obligations is his approach to what are the obligations of citizenship? Because the only two mandated ones we're not very good at, jury service and voting. Okay?
that's right.
What is it to be a citizen? We want the benefits of citizenship, but we don't want the work. Let somebody else do it. Let the elected officials be responsible for it. This is our community. This is an opportunity. I don't cast aspersions on a legislature that can't create perfect legislation, because there's no such thing. And there's always something in the legislation that is going to cause consternation. I think they did the best that they could. You've heard me say I disagree with some of it, but I understand it. We need to imbue in our public servants a sense of validation first. If you want to reform something, you can't push it away. If you want to get people to think differently about how they do their job, you can't paint them with a broad brush and say they're all bad. And so, and some of the parts of the bill are evocative of that notion, right? Punitive. I'm not disrespecting anybody by saying, well, that's what we do in America. We're punitive. We're one of the most punitive industrial democracies on the planet. On the planet. What about hope? What about redemption? What about opportunities? What about second chances? Aren't those things that should be built into our system? So I don't think you can legislate that. I think that we come together and we have conversations. And we agree to disagree.
Cops, though, because for criminals, when it's legislated, there's pretty strict guidelines. So cops shouldn't have guidelines if they break.
Oh, I think everybody should have guidelines, absolutely.
You just said that we can't for cops, though.
I didn't say we can't. We must. I agree that the police reform bill is necessary. I agree with that.
Yeah.
Okay. But I also say that a system of social control, if you want to take it apart, you have to be able to replace it.
Well, no, I'm just touching on the point you were saying, like, we can't be specific to the guidelines, like touching on like posts you were talking about, like there has to be some leeway. But when it goes to the opposite side of a criminal, we have very strict guidelines.
We have lawyers and judges interpreting that.
So why would we give, like, you're saying give precedent to like a cop if he gets a second chance because he's a cop?
No. I'm talking about human beings. I'm talking about humanity. I spent most of my career.
About law.
The law is imperfect. The American legal system is based upon property rights. The American political system is living and breathing in a capitalist nation where we can talk all day about the fact that social status doesn't matter. It does matter, and wealth doesn't matter. Yes, it does matter. And so.
Matters more.
I mean, I would
just
love to
everything.
have seen some sort of like, something that equals the playing field for those potentially harmed by the acts of officers that they don't necessarily have unless they're going civilly. any recourse because it's almost defeating to bring it to the court if you're trying to hold someone accountable on the officer's side. So I would have liked to have seen some sort of provision in that would have provided some sort of equalized, not just pro bono selected attorney that may not be doing their best.
So I'll give you-
Actual grant money that would give you
Right.
an attorney that would be.
So I'll give you an example of topics that we discuss in the courses that I teach. Abolition of the plea bargain. In a state that abolished the plea bargain in 1975, the number of felony arrests and prosecutions went down by 70% within 10 years. You touched on defenses. That's not an equal playing field now. Everybody knows that. And so I would invite you to read books written by Jerry Spence, country lawyer from Wyoming, who says that never lost a case in 66 years. He abandoned his practice working for an insurance company to open his own law school, to teach lawyers how to be empathic, to teach them about substantive justice, fairness, and equity. People don't have confidence in their government when they see gross inequity, which is what you're talking about. If a person goes to prison and they do their time, our society says that's paying the debt. But then we impose collateral consequences on them when they leave.
I'm still serving my time,
I understand.
and I haven't been in trouble in 10 years.
I understand. And these are complicated issues, and we need to be able to sit in a room civilly, as we are today, with our Zoom friends, talking about that. Talking about the inherent inequality that exists in systems, in organizations, when we seek to preserve the status quo.
In this, you talk about the post, but when I read up on the post this year, it seems like they're pretty inadequate in their job. It was like, they went through and there was only like 15 officers out of all of Massachusetts or something around that they even said are not recertified.
Point of order, I think I was next.
Okay, that's okay, we got a little, that's all right, and I'm sorry, I apologize.
That's all right.
Okay, so you're on.
So, I think that, first of all, I'm really impressed with a lot of what you said, and I'm also really happy that we're having this conversation in this way. So, thank you, Councillor Forgy, for putting this together.
Welcome.
And
It was Penny's
to
idea.
everyone who's watching at home, to anyone who's listening later, our goal is to do more of these, and the extent to which you participate is what is going to make future meetings like this possible. And so thank you to the several members of the public who are in the room and online, because that's what really makes this useful. We can have anybody to the council and ask questions anytime we want, but to actually have a public forum, I think, is really valuable. I'm probably going to come up with a few, but I'm going to do one now and then wait till everyone's had a turn. So it's one thing to talk about holding the police accountable and the general players in the system, the judiciary, et cetera. One thing that I think about a lot is how we hold ourselves accountable for how we use the police. Because the truth is that a lot of bias is baked into the culture, and the police can't control that because the police are going to respond to the calls that they get. And if 75% of the calls that we make are concerns about Black people, then it fundamentally doesn't matter whether the police or the system is biased, because that's who they're going to be looking after, that's who they're going to be investigating. And there are a tremendous number of calls that go out to the police in Greenfield and in everywhere else that are totally baseless and that just amount to someone's mad at someone else and they want a person with a gun to take care of it. And I will say in full disclosure that in my life, I have probably done that a couple of times because it was a culture that I grew up with, and I'm still trying to unlearn it. I don't think that I've done a very good job at unlearning it.
It's hard.
You're young.
When I look at all the calls that I've
Yeah,
had,
me.
I have had to make a lot of calls to the police over the last month because of stuff going on, and I think most of them were substantive, but I would hesitate to say all, and that's even after I'm continuously thinking about this. So a culture change is going to take forever, but do you think there are some standards we can put in place to say, if you call and say your neighbor picked her nose, the police are not going to show? Because right now in Greenfield, the police show up to all the calls, and we make our staffing decisions on the basis of how many calls we're getting, not how many crimes are being committed, which I would like to change that. I don't know how to do that, but I don't think that we need police officers to respond when someone's just mad at their neighbor. There should have to be some basis for the call being responded to. How do we address that?
But can I bring up one point?
Sure.
Because I heard about it tonight. So someone brought to my attention on Chapman Street, a gentleman, African-American, went to go visit his daughter who was sleeping over a friend's house for a moment and went away, and the police came and, asked the kids, like, who was that person that was there and what happened? And then, the police asked to speak to the parents and said, what was going on? And it was just somebody in the neighborhood who called because they just didn't want that car outside of their house. And they just said it was on their property. So it's got to be a culture change for everyone, because the police have to come, because the person who called,
Right.
don't know if it's legit scared or thought maybe something's going on because they never saw that person in the community before. But I know how I feel deep down about it, all that happened, but we can't be upset that the police showed up to something when somebody calls, because you don't know how frantic they spoke or what they said. And it's actually just their job. And then later on, they figure out the person it's mental health issue, it's ignorance, or it's racism. But what did they
Penny,
have to do?
I disagree with you, because I think that there are some calls that are made where the person may do that, but I think that people make a lot of calls out of spite to the police. And if there were some threshold for response, that's sort of what I'm saying. You can't just say my neighbor picked her nose and have them respond.
Well, in policing, you don't have the luxury
Right.
of not responding to a call, because.
Of course you do.
Yes.
The state
You do
police.
not. In local policing, you do not, because what if that person, quote unquote, picking their nose, set it on fire, and now you've got a burning fence or
So
something
then we
in
should
the
just have
yard.
police watching us all the time and never have a break.
Okay.
You're saying there's no threshold. I could call the police right now and say I disagreed with you and they should show up here and talk to us? No.
It could escalate. What if this conversation
Anything
really
could escalate,
and it got to a threatening part or whatever? Somebody even watching, like there's already 3 or 4 police up there, they could hear it and somebody would respond to help de-escalate the situation. It's because it's their job to do. So some people may think we don't want the police showing up to everything, and other people want to do it because that's how they feel safe. So
Yeah,
this
that's
is a
fine.
conversation we have with police in the room sometime, because it's a hard call.
I just want, my husband retired from the fire department as a deputy chief. So a lot of times people would call up and say, I smell smoke in my apartment. Okay, they call the fire department, I smell smoke in my apartment. Could you just bring a little truck? Okay. Could you just bring a little truck? But by the time they get there, the person's pot on the stove is now, whatever. It's, you have, public safety has a legal obligation to show up whenever they are called. And the neighbor, as Penny was saying, and as David was saying, it's going to take a cultural change because the police, you put them into a position where they're judging what's important, what isn't important. That's not their job to judge. Suppose, like you know, somebody's tattling. As mayor, you know what the most telephone, I don't know if the mayor can weigh in on this, but you know what you get the most complaints at when you get
Not have
into
the mayor weigh in
office?
on this.
Yeah, it's trees and dogs. The dog next door pooped on my lawn, and I want you to come over and do something about it. That's cultural. Now, the police don't respond to that, okay? But if some,
They don't.
But they-
If you call the police, they will say, no, we're not coming.
they'll send the dog officer, or they'll say, contact the Board of Health, or they'll say, there's another office that can help you with this.
So that
And the
means we
police-
do have a standard for what constitutes the need for a police response. And dispatch has a role to play in this. So I am not saying I have the answer. I don't think I need to be rebutted by people who say, oh, you're so young and cute, why would you bring this up?
I didn't say cute.
But my point here,
I'm not saying that because you're young, you brought it up, but.
No, but I do get this response all the time. Well, of course, don't you know we have to respond to everything? No, we don't. We can make a decision as a society that some things don't need a guy with a gun. So that's why I'm asking the expert, what do we do about this?
And thank you, I will back off, but thank you.
I have two examples just to share. So, okay, so let me just share 3 points that I put in my appendix. Creation of post-release officers and crisis intervention officers that are part of a budget that we don't have to fight about every year with our legislators to keep in our budgets. Creation of diversion courts and statutory crisis intervention teams within law enforcement agencies. And creation, and we don't have this. I mean, as advanced a state as Massachusetts is, I'll give you an example of a Texas model that shames us.
Okay.
The creation of continuity of care infrastructure. It should be done at the regional level, housing, jobs, insurance, wraparound services. We re-enter people in the community. There has to be a soft handoff. We just can't say, see you later. I mean,
Right.
we're not being realistic. So let me give you 2 examples of things that I've been involved with. One is called the Bahar County model. Bahar County, Texas, it's spelled B-E-X-A-R. Bahar County, Texas built an infrastructure so that the police can be police and be relieved of many of these issues. What are the options for the police officers on the scene today? Not many. So how many people could not be arrested and diverted if there was a place to go, where there was a magistrate working, and there was a menu of opportunities to divert a person from being arrested? That is very real. It's very evidence-based.
Yeah.
And it reduces the number of people in jails. So Bahar County, Texas have an overcrowded jail system. They end up with a beautiful CIT system supported at the county level with county levies, which they call them in those states, revenues. Okay, and they work. When I was a young academician, I found out about a program in Rochester, New York, which is Monroe County, major metro area, called PACTAC, Police and Citizens Together Against Crime. I went there for a weekend. Phenomenal. I get introduced to the people from the county sheriff's office, from the municipal police department, from the state police. Well, they're actually talking to each other. That's a good thing. And they're collaborating in the neighborhoods in and around Rochester with community members who want to serve, who want to be about their neighborhoods and their communities. And this thing was formalized. And it was building trust, and it was building culture, and it was amazing. And I spent an entire weekend, and I came back to Massachusetts all excited. And just before I left, one of the lieutenants from the city police department said, by the way, I was born and raised in Massachusetts. And if you bring this back to Massachusetts, you may not be able to get it off the ground. I think he was saying we're a little parochial. And I think he was right.
Okay.
We argue over boundaries. We argue over jurisdiction. I want to argue robustly, not mean-spiritedly, over solutions. How do we fix problems? I think that's the question you're asking. How do we minimize, you're recognizing a burden on the police that I think is real. We need to minimize that. I don't know if I'm a fan of complete civilian response, but I am a fan of co-response, but it has to be funded.
Sure, but that wasn't the question I was asking.
Okay.
The question I'm asking is not how do we innovate in the ways that we respond. I'm asking how do we put a floor on the response so that how can we safely take away my right to use the police to harass you?
Because you have a disagreement with a neighbor or something like that?
Or because so there's no validation of whether or not the call is legitimate. I can call the police 30 times in a row over the course of 2 or 3 months and say that you're doing something, and you will have a continuous police presence in your life, whether you are a law-abiding citizen or not. And guess who that happens to the most? Black people, gay people, Jewish people.
So we have anecdotal evidence about the deployment of police resources
Right?
based upon political considerations, based upon economic considerations, and based upon social considerations. So I won't say that you're wrong.
Right.
Some of my fellow speakers at LEAP talk about that when we address community groups. The fact that an officer who was waiting to become a Charleston, South Carolina police officer took a job at a college, and the college was located within the city confines. And when he became an officer there, he was told that there was a policy for drug offenses that required them to be handled administratively and administratively only. Then he got a job as a city police officer, and he was on the 3 to 11 shift, and the precinct sergeant said to him on the first night, "You're deployed to this neighborhood, which happens to be the poorest and darkest neighborhood in the city, and we have a zero tolerance policy per the council, per the mayor, for drug crimes in this area." So why does that happen? Well, we all know why. Let's not pretend we, don't have a system in the United States that separates people out, right? Don't pretend. But I think that forums like this are the beginning of a conversation.
Right.
The problem becomes, again, I think we're operating in a period of complete polarization. I'm not blind. I read the newspaper. I look at the news every day. Washington is polarized. States are polarized. Local people are polarized. It's amazing how many separate groups can be 100% right, isn't it?
That's correct.
Right. So, let's come down off our horses and realize that we actually share something in common. Humanity. The social construct belongs to us.
Councilor Lapinski, are you all set?
No, because David, you're still talking about response.
Yeah.
And the question I'm raising has nothing to do with the response. My question has to do with the calls that are being made in the first place. I think a lot of them are bogus. And if we have no discretion on whether to respond, not how to respond, but whether to respond, then I can use the police to harass you. And I shouldn't be allowed to do that, because if you are not breaking any laws and you're not hurting me,
Right.
then I shouldn't be allowed to inconvenience you by calling 911.
So let me try to give
At all.
Let me try to give you the best answer that I can come up with now.
Okay.
First, you're right. Second, the devil is in the details on situations like that, because my lawyer hat says, well, there's liability for failing to respond. My oath in the capacity that I serve says I have a moral and constitutional obligation to respond, right?
Yeah.
And so we need to come up with protocols which let us say we're not going to respond to that. You made a reference to the state police. The reason the state police don't respond is because they're not primary. They don't have a primary obligation to respond to our calls. We had an agreement with them,
Yeah.
but the majority of their work is self-generated. So municipal police truly, in my view, have the hardest job in policing in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts because they're expected to provide services 24/7 of a law enforcement nature and every other thing that a citizen feels they need to call the police for. And I don't have the answer to how to fix that, but I acknowledge the problem.
Fair enough. Now I'm all set.
Thank you. I want to, I know there's some more questions back here, but I do have somebody who's coming in on Zoom who does have a question. So let me just hope I'm doing this correctly. Unmute. Okay. There is a guest coming in named Susan. Susan, you have your hand up. You have a question?
Yes, thank you. My name is Susan White. I'm a citizen of Greenfield. I apologize.
We can't hear you, Susan.
Point of order, Councillor Forte, should people, members of the public be introducing themselves with their name and address like public comment?
Yes, we could do that, but I need to get her
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, a little louder.
a little louder.
Is that
Susan?
better, Councillor? Is that better?
That is better. Can you tell us who you are and
Yes.
where you live, please?
Yes, my name is Susan White. I live at 55 Plain Road in Greenfield. I'm a Greenfield citizen, have been for 5 years. I want to thank you, councillors, today for this wonderful opportunity to be here. The Community Relations Committee. It's the first time I've been here. And what I want to raise a number of questions. I would like to start just also to say that they don't have to be answered today. Hopefully this will be a long discussion.
Susan, sorry. Yeah, it's very difficult to hear you.
Could you try your volume? Does your volume go up at all? Mine's at 80. Is it? Can you hear me now?
Can you get closer to whatever mic you're using on your phone or your tablet or?
How is that? Is that better?
There you go.
Thank you. Can you
Great, thank you. I
start
apologize.
again, please, okay, with your name and where you live? Thank you.
My name is Susan White. I live at 225 Plain Road in Greenfield. I've lived in Greenfield for coming on 6 years now. I'm grateful to be here tonight. I'd like to first thank you, councilors, for hosting this session. And Commissioner Lowry, I'd like to say thank you for that stunning and comprehensive presentation of the police reform bill. I am familiar with it, and I have to say, I'm so grateful that was recorded and is something that could be referred to in the future to learn about the bill. I've heard a number of things. I've been listening very carefully. Councillor Fogarty about how do we do this? Councillor Ricketts, you raised repeatedly, how does bias inform our actions and our perspectives? That's what I heard you say. And Councillor Lipinski, you raised an interesting point about the floor. My sense is when we work on anti-racist and learning about our biases, it's a very important initiative. I'd like to just say that this practice of transformation is what I would call it. We have started in Greenfield. We started it over a year and a half ago. It was a harsh beginning in my experience as a citizen, but we did start it, and I can look back on that with gratitude now. I'd like to propose and ask that we look at this, the how part, in terms of long-term engagement and short-term engagement actions. I did have the good fortune of serving on the public safety.
You're fading out from us.
For 1 year. And what I learned, and I think tonight you raised some interesting ideas, that could we consider the public review board being reviewed annually, Commissioner Lori, by you or someone with your level of expertise and skill, because it is important to understand it. That's a question. The second is, will the city council and the mayor continue to have long-term sustained engagement? I believe we're seeing that. I mean, just by having this session tonight, but it's a question. But will this be sustained through transformations? The short-term engagement actions I'd like to ask about and raise are ones that I've learned from other communities. Officer Gordon, when she moved to Irving, has already started a coffee with cops. I'm always curious of our 36 or 35 police officer force, how many people in Greenfield actually know the names of the officers or know the officers beyond the chief and the deputy chief? We need to get to know our police. And even the questions that are raised here tonight, is anyone talking to the police themselves? What are your ideas? So my questions are coffee with cops, but not at one cafe, at every coffee shop, because every coffee shop has a different audience. And that would be the whole thing. The other questions I wanted to raise just for future consideration, could we do phase 2 of differences of dialogues across differences? But this time funded by the city council. The mayor funded the first time. I was involved in that with 50 people in Greenfield. Could we do it again? Public Safety Day, I went to it last year. Could it be treated as a priority in Greenfield that does engage community college participation and really treats it as an opportunity to engage? And the last thing I wanted to mention was just, could we envision even this Community Relations Committee 1 year from now having more diverse participation, having police who want to join and participate and raise their questions? We need to focus on the trust that comes from long-term sustained commitment and anti-racist and learning about our biases. I believe we are in the process. My questions are ones that don't have to be answered tonight, but I am interested in the how as a citizen. I think that's where we are. We need to be, how do we do it in Greenfield, and move forward with that, but engage the police and the community and have more feedback from both of those groups. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Doug.
Doug, Councilor Mayo.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. First off, I want to commend the prior speaker. They had some wonderful ideas, and they should be acted on continually for the duration of this committee, no matter where it leads to. But I wanted to talk about what David Lanoy had said. Is part of the beginning of this is we're a democracy, and democracy depends on the people, ordinary people being part of the democracy. And in this case, he brought up jury service. And I can't tell you, every time I have jury service, I have never said no to jury service. I always, one of my favorite movies is 12 Angry Men.
Good movie.
Great movie.
Yep.
It's a great movie, and I would highly recommend those people who have not seen it to watch it. It has a lot of the things that we've spoken about tonight, right in the movie. Even though it's a movie, it speaks directly to bias and to racism and to participation. And what I hear all the time is people trying to make flimsy excuses for trying to get out of jury service. And I think that is very disgusting. I think it's your job as a citizen to participate in the, when you get a jury service, you should respond yes, unless there's a vital reason why you should say no. You shouldn't make up reasons willy-nilly just to get out of serving jury service. And I do want to say that there are some states that are making it possible that people that have had a record, a felony, that you can now vote. And I think that is a great thing. I think that should happen statewide, as the United States should have that. You've done your service. You've done your time. You've paid your time, and you should be willing to. You should be have an opportunity to vote again. So anyway, I just wanted to talk about that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Because I thought it was important. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Mayo. Thank you. Okay, so are there more questions? Marco?
Down in 29 prospect.
Okay, nice to see you again, Mark. Okay.
These aren't questions necessarily. Before that, it was 8 years in Boston and 6 years. Guarantee you with assurance that the dispatcher will in fact tell you, we're not doing anything, you figure it out. And it's nice that we live in a small town where police feel that they have to respond to every call. Let's talk about your wanting to raise the floor. My perspective is I don't really want to have coffee with the police. I want to see the police. I think the number one deterrent to crime and bad behavior is officer presence, right? And that doesn't mean surveillance. That doesn't mean patch risks. That just means every once in a while on Prospect Street, I see a police vehicle. Because no one else sees it is the neighbor who's under Dell crap on my lawn, or the fellow who thinks about going into the vacant lot to do whatever he does. Just seeing a police officer deters sort of all kinds of bad behavior. And so I would like us to move from a model where the local police feel they have to respond to calls rather than we have to be seen, we have to be out there. All right, I have wonky points about the observation that criminals have all rights to police. And any crime that I can get arrested for, there's elements, punishments, and attending circumstances. And so in the courts, they wrestle with the elements and the attending circumstances. So there's that leeway. But I think much more important is officer discretion. Police officers are not justice machines. They don't have to go and take out the batons and start swinging. They can assess and do what he's doing. There's all kinds of fuzziness. And even after a disposition, it could be a continued on a finding or a guilty finding, or you are referred to drug court or community corrections. There's all kinds of sort of dispositions that can happen in the confines of the criminal justice system. Let's talk inside baseball. You feel that a 4-year degree might be a prerequisite to getting hired. And 2 years, you said? 2 years?
Yeah.
Sorry, Mr. Lowry. Here's my take on it is a lot of things happen. You enter into law enforcement and find out, oh my gosh, this isn't for me. Or even if you're just in school, you're saying this isn't for me. And more inside baseball, I think the Quinn bill is the way to go. And the Quinn bill is where you get a stipend for every level of education that you have. The more education you have, the more stipend you get.
They also
And
pay
that's sort of,
tuition.
Like teachers.
They do pay tuition too, didn't they?
I understand that it's going to be funded, but I'm saying, at your point, that it has to be a prerequisite. I think we sort of work at your own pace, get the money when you have an incentive to get the degree, you get the educated officer. It's kind of win-win as far as I see it. And another thing is you're, and again, this is wonk talk, but you're asking the legislature to make it hard and fast in the law itself, and that's not really, my experience with the legislature is you don't want them to do that. You want them to sort of defer to the executive agencies, to let them sort of firm things up because they know what's going on.
Thank you.
And just a point of order, David's last name is Lanoy.
So if we were able to envision a hybrid whereby education is valued alongside training, And there are templates for this all over the country. In fact, the president of Northern Essex Community College, his name is Lane Glenn, spearheaded a move among the statewide coordinators, of which I am one, of the 15 community colleges, criminal justice programs, to talk about bringing the community colleges closer. In fact, his experience, I believe he's from Michigan, was that community colleges are the sites where police training and education happens in a post system. Whenever we talk about that, if we're going to talk inside baseball, that's a non-starter. So, but I hear what you're saying.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Do you know how many folks rejected this year?
I don't. It's so
The
new.
numbers were very, very.
It's very new. So, yeah.
Ryan, will you state your name and address for the record?
You just have to talk louder for that. So. Sorry.
So many requirements.
No, I just know when I was reading about it and like looking up on it, because I wanted to see if any of our clubs got certified, and a lot of it was like for posts now, it's like a lot of the other agencies I see out there that are supposed to be doing all this, and there's all these things, but then there's no real backbone to it.
So all the lists, as the lists become available, you can access those at mass.gov. But I think what we need to do is, like anything that's research-based, we need time and we need to evaluate it. We're not in a position to do that yet because it's so new. And I'm hesitant to give specific answers to certain questions, none of which you asked, thankfully, because it's really been because there's so much leeway that's been given for the interpretation of the statute, that things can be one way on a Tuesday, but next Monday they're not. And I'm going to reserve my judgment on what I think about that. But we have to get a cadence going here.
Because the guidelines are posted pretty clear, and I see lots of
There's,
lots of violations of it.
we're in the throes of creating a whole new bureaucracy.
So it's nice to talk about enforcement of these things, but as you go and look into the action stuff, like I hear you say a lot of fancy words and all these things are happening, but when you actually do research, it's not that way.
I hear you.
That's with that's for the homeless, that's for mental health, that's for the CSO program that I seen, that my neighbor had CSO go to their house 3 times in that program, and then she committed suicide on the 3rd time because no one would sanction her, because, you know, she probably should have got sanctioned. Because it was too touch and feel.
Exception.
Yeah.
Okay, so we are coming up on the second hour of our meeting, but if Stephanie, you still have a few more things to do? Say?
Stephanie Duclos, Greenfield, nice. David, great, felt like I was in school again. I did.
We're on the same field.
When I was in your program, I took a course with Buzz Eisenberg, who, I mean, we only had 4 people in the class at that time. And I remember the conversation being along the lines of, he really wished there was more police officers mandated to sit there learning about the rights, the constitutional rights they were violating for the people that they were arresting. And so if you know more about the rights you need to also protect as a human being for those people and what their recourse could be against you, it gives you a little bit more time to think of, well, if I treat them this way, they could come at me this way because I'm violating the human guaranteed right to them. And he thought it was important that people were taught the constitutional law and procedure. And I didn't know if he had been.
Buzz was a member of the Criminal Justice Department before he retired.
If he had been in on this reform and maybe some of his views about actually some required courses that he thinks that maybe police officers should take.
Well, I think they would. I continue to collaborate with Buzz and go on his radio show. You know, he's an excellent attorney. He's an excellent advocate for the rights of people in a free society. And then achieving that balance and understanding. Look, the reason that I promote college is plain and simple. Yeah, it is the place where we can have the marketplace of ideas. I have taught in MPTC approved academies. They're fine. I don't ever have enough time. If I'm teaching criminal procedure and I want to talk about why in the United States of America unprovoked flight from a police officer in a poor neighborhood involving a young 15-year-old African-American child was seen as legal because it allowed the officers to remove the ambiguity, is what the unanimous opinion of the court said, or close to unanimous. I want to be able to talk about that. But you're allocated so many hours to teach criminal procedure. Okay? I am not suggesting for a moment that we don't have well-trained officers. Training and education are two different things. And so for a while, the coordinators were talking to each other and to their stakeholders in the various areas served by the community colleges about credit for training. I'm not a proponent of that. We were asked to do alignments. Well, if you have so many hours of criminal procedure in a training academy, then that should equate to how many credits. I agree with that.
102 hours.
So, you know, we're talking about the opportunity to explore. That's what college is. It is an opportunity beyond high school. And, you know, I didn't know that until I went to college. And I had the opportunity to debate with my political philosophy professor about the fact that at the ripe age of 20, I believed that there should be a mandate to vote and a penalty for not voting. And he had to explain to me how undemocratic that was.
Right.
So, right? So,
Australia.
you know, in a free society, with a Bill of Rights, and again, the book I talked about, the Bill of Obligations, you know, is a worthy read. Freedom is not free. Liberty is not free. Choices should have consequences. We should understand how people come to make choices. We should not paint anybody with one brush and say, you know, we found out with testing in schools, if we're testing to a white middle class standard, because, you know, that's what we do, then are the test scores and results going to be a fair metric for making determinations about other people, about people that aren't within that socioeconomic place, that racial place, that neighborhood? It's complicated. You know, and I didn't come here tonight pretending to be able to solve all that. But we
Living in it.
Sorry about that.
Living in it and learning in it gives you a different perspective too.
Right. So thank you, though. I appreciate this opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's been wonderful.
I think the most important takeaway for me was you saying how we have to meet in the middle and we have to stop being on the other side. You know, like we were brought up to respect the police, and it's okay to still respect them, even if you feel like someone did something wrong, or even if I feel like, you know, when the Black Lives Matter thing was all going on, I was still respecting police because they're all not one person. They all don't think alike. And so we really have to come together, and you're right. We got to stop being polarized. So if we can't do it on our local level, you know, there's no hope for the national level.
Right. A trusted colleague of mine at the college, who is also involved in ministry, said to me one day, you know, no person is one-dimensional. That was a great piece of information and advice.
Everybody, well, yes, thanks.
May I ask another question?
Sure. It's fine.
So I'm going to ask a question having to do with a police officer's right to self-defense, which they obviously have. But I think a police officer's right to self-defense is more complicated than a regular citizen's because they're expected to put themselves in danger. as part of their job. And the most well-known example of what I'm talking about has to do with Breonna Taylor in Kentucky, because what happened there, as everyone knows, is the police officers burst in serving a warrant. Her boyfriend didn't know they were police officers, thought his home was being invaded and shot at them. And they returned fire and killed her. Now, if I were a police officer there, I'd probably return fire because someone's shooting at me. I guess fundamentally the question is, does a police officer have the right to put themselves in danger and then defend themselves by killing someone who wasn't a threat to them prior to them intervening in something? I imagine it's not a black and white answer, but does the police reform bill address that? And also, what do you think about it?
It addresses use of force. I can't speak intelligently to the specifics of how it does.
Okay.
You raise a very interesting and complicated point. With respect for brevity, I would say that in that example, the police officer does not act intentionally to put themselves where they were. They're put there as responders.
Right.
And that chain of events was tragic in its outcome. And it begs, at least for the kind of discussion that we're having. And, the social construct is so tenuous from Jump Street, right?
From what?
From the beginning, from Jump Street.
Okay.
The social construct, I don't think we spend as much time thinking about that as we should. And I think that's why I picked the quote, that particular quote from Edwin Delattre about, this notion of the social construct really being a departure from, this indifferent universe into which we're born. The equilibrium is very delicate. And all you have to do is look at a parking lot that has this much snow on it to see how chaos erupts when we don't have guidance and lines. So, again, we're never going to have perfection. That's not possible in the social sciences. And we can't make the perfect the enemy of the good, but we have to strive to build systems and fellowships that hopefully reduce the opportunities for the need to be in a situation where deadly force is used. And to Mr. Rodato's point, I just wanted to mention what he was mentioning was a famous piece of research called the Kofor curve, named for the man who studied and researched and invented it, that police presence reduces opportunity for crime. And there's a period of time, even after the police leave a location, where that potential for crime stays at a very, very low percentage. I don't want you to think, as Public Safety Commissioner, I'm making an argument for doubling the police force. However, more police patrolling,
Yep.
being present, expresses the Kofor curve.
Sure.
Maria?
Maria Burge, Garfield Street in Greenfield. David, in my 35 years of law enforcement background, you and I have worked on a lot of these issues.
Yes.
And I am happy to see that it finally feels like it's going to move forward. So what is Greenfield's plan for the next steps?
Well, that would probably be a question for the chairman of the Public Safety Commission if
It was your meeting.
That's my meeting. So I think that I'm most interested in dialogue.
Yeah.
I mean, I could talk if you'd like, but I don't want to distract from.
Well, but you do have some plans as chair. I wanted to be honest.
What are the plans for the next steps as to how we move forward in around
Well,
these issues?
David and I talk a lot, and I truly respect what he's saying as a colleague and a friend, and I think he's right. We have to have dialogue, and nobody's going to be perfect. The police aren't going to be perfect, the citizens aren't going to be perfect, but if we don't come together and talk about the issues and listen to both sides and try to move forward, we're gonna be fighting. It's gonna be arguments and it's gonna be fights. People make mistakes, but we need to learn what those mistakes are, and we just need to move on, and we need to improve. I mean, if we don't have a chance to improve, we're not gonna have a chance to make things better. So we have to talk about policies and procedures working. They might be, some of them might be working, some of them might not be working, but we have to look at the policies and procedures. We have to decide whether they're working. We have to listen to both sides of the arguments, whether they think they're working or not. And we have to change, we have to evolve, we have to make things better. I mean.
So I have a response. So if you look at the 9 principles, I have some favorites among those, 7 and 9. 7 says to maintain at all times a relationship with the public that gives reality to the historic tradition that the police are the public and that the public are the police. The police being only members of the public who are paid to give full attention to duties which are incumbent upon every citizen in the interest of community welfare and existence. And number 9, and this is a tough one because I've been members of police chief organizations in my academic role, and it's a hard conversation because number 9 says to recognize always that the test of police efficiency is the absence of crime and disorder and not the visible evidence of police action in dealing with them. So the history of criminology has been the belief that crime prevention should be the focus of our efforts, that we need to be prepared to deal with crimes occurring, but that prevention should be the byword that we strive for. So I'll say something that so that I don't have people thinking out there that I'm Pollyannish. I live in the same world as everybody else. I understand. But if you look at those 9 principles, it should be okay to reach for those. Right? It should be okay to reach for those. May not get there. Does that mean we do nothing? Or does it mean we do the same thing we've always done? Being insane and expecting different results. We have problems in our nation. We have problems in our communities. People don't trust each other. People are yelling at each other. People are anxious. Am I the only one that feels that? I don't think so.
No, you're not.
It's palpable. It's real. I love the 9 principles because I think they're intelligently stated, and I think that they mark what I would call the progress of a maturing society in its evolution. They look toward how democracies solve problems. It's messy, we know that. People get upset, we know that. Okay? You know, if you have a committee of the whole, I know that there's some folks that want to make Public Safety Commission larger. Okay, I can live with that. But I don't know if larger is better. I served on a city council that had 27 members.
Oh my God. Yeah.
So, people have to step up and serve. People have to serve. You have to be willing to serve. Well, I do lead talks. I don't get paid for that. I've traveled all over New England, and I do it on Zooms and Skypes to talk to people about potentially maybe there's a pathway. For instance, in South Philadelphia, I talked on a radio station. It was a very conservative Christian station, and they said, well, we need to enforce the drug war. And I said, well, what is it getting you? You've got whole neighborhoods of boxed out buildings and people sick on heroin and dying in the streets. I don't think Christians want that, do they? I don't think that's what the gospel talks about in any faith, does it? So maybe we have to have a mixture of law enforcement and supervised injection facilities. If you go on the LEAP website, you'll see me on a panel discussion at Boston University Medical School as the law enforcement representative, talking about why I think that that's a good idea. And if you take the time to look at that, the woman at the extreme, there's 3 of us, 2 women and myself. The woman in the middle is a public health physician, and the woman on the end was recovering. She was in a period of recovery from heroin. And a couple of years after I participated in that forum, she died of an overdose. We need to start valuing each other's lives. And it can't be someone's way or the highway.
Exactly.
Maybe we have to do, I don't believe that the drug war has been successful. I give speeches about that. There's been no evidence to support that it is. Okay? But I'm not foolish enough to say we shouldn't do interdiction, that we shouldn't arrest anybody.
Can I say something? Coming from an ex-drug addict though, if there was that safe space for me to go to, probably still be a drug addict to this day. If there was free drugs for me to go to.
And see, and there's an opinion. Right, and there's an opinion. And that's what makes these things difficult to solve.
Right.
But what I've seen in the last few years is nobody wants to talk about them,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And talking over each other doesn't solve a problem.
We just got to keep talking
You
because
have to keep talking.
things are changed. I mean, there was another shooting today at a school.
Yeah.
You know what? I didn't grow up with that either.
No.
And so their families, everything is different now. So we have to keep talking and be open and meet in the middle sometimes and stop, digging in and it's one way and that's it. It's not that way. So.
When we find happiness with each other, we don't find it at the mall. And we have to start, and I'm paraphrasing Professor Sue Jolly of UMass, lives down the street. He's world renowned for his conversations about how the market economy has turned us into consumers. Every person for themselves. I have my students watch it. He came to Greenfield Community College. Where is happiness? Where is sociability? It's in fellowship. It's in people. It's not in things.
That's right.
As the Amazon truck drives up my driveway.
Yeah.
Every day, right?
Same. Yeah. Thank you so much. I appreciate
Thank you
this
very much.
very much.
I appreciate you being here. It was very enlightening. I'm looking forward to that,
Thank you, everyone.
those conversations
Thank you,
continuing.
everyone. Yes.
With public safety especially, we're
Yeah.
very interested in seeing what's going to happen.
Right.
So thank you all, everyone who's
Yes.
joined us on Zoom. Thank you all for being here this evening. There's no new business. And our April 17th meeting is going to have to be rescheduled because that is a holiday.
Right.
So watch for the notice from Tammy and we'll be meeting sometime in April, but I don't know when that is at the moment. So anyway, thank you all so much for being here.